All right. Welcome to another episode of Full Circle. Today we're going to continue with the aforementioned format from a bit back, where I'm just going to talk about a valid topic, and then we're going to keep it concise, keep it to that. This one may not be one of the shortest ones, but we're still going to dive into it. So today, what I'm in this episode, what I'm talking about is the 7th season of the active duty roster, also known as ADR. For those of you who aren't aware, ADR is something used in 2 of the formats that Privateer Press does. One of them is Masters, the other one is Champions. And given that those are formats you're most likely to see at conventions, and sometimes your press ganger might be just running them. The ADR is 4 warcasters or warlocks per faction, and they have 2 different effects depending on the format you play in. If you play in a Masters event, each of those warlocks, if you take 2 of the warlocks out of those 4 when you play your faction, you are eligible for 40 points of specialists for each of your casters, which is sort of like sideboard if you've ever played Magic. So what that allows you, and I'm not going to go into the details of how this works exactly, but basically it will allow you to add and remove things from your list based on your matchup. So you get into your Masters game. Weird thing going on here. This makes like the worst mirror. Whatever. Oh, made it worse. Whatever. So what it does is, so let's say, for example, you have Eilish in your main list, or maybe he's in your 40 points of specialists, and in that 5 points you normally would just be running a unit of Shifting Stones with the Stonekeeper, which is also 5 points, or a Sentry Stone, 5 points, right? You would substitute those 5 points out, you bring Eilish in, and now you've got some answers to spells. And then if you feel like you don't need Eilish, you play the Sentry Stone. So that's just one example. And then you would do that for more points, obviously, but you get the idea. You can't really change what your list has. So like if you're a certain tier, or if you have a certain number of points for a certain benefit in your theme force, then you need to maintain that, I believe, and things like that. So that's one format. The other format is Champions. And in Champions, your list construction is actually limited to the 4 warlocks that are in your active duty roster. So you could only bring a pairing that included them. You do not get the specialists in that format. So we're going to talk through Circle's warlocks for this, and I'm going to be looking at it with a slant toward Champions. And the reason I'm going to do that is I personally, we'll go over the list and we can talk about why, but I personally feel like even with the selection of warlocks given to Circle for a Masters event, that you would still be farther ahead to just bring, I think it would be more ideal to bring a pairing that you have that is not restricted just to gain the specialist bonus. I don't think, given our current roster of casters, themes, and whatnot, that the special, this is my belief, that doesn't mean that it's definitive. I don't believe that will bring enough benefit to warrant doing. Okay, so without further ado, the active duty roster for Circle includes Tanith the Feral Song, Chromac Champion of the Worm, that's Chromac 2, Balder the Stonecleaver, which is Balder 1, and Mosar the Desert Walker. If you're trying to sort of evaluate how active duty roster is, like what its impact or like what its power level, if you will, is for a faction, I would say we're very middle of the road. Unlike there's a few listed in here where I feel like they really got some of, like, there's 2 casters that a lot of people are just going to pair up anyways. The smaller factions almost always feel stronger because, if you're a Convergence, you have 6 options, and it's pretty unlikely that, like, out of 6 when you have only losing 2, that there aren't 2 out of the remaining 4 that are going to be strong. So that applies kind of to Convergence, to Grimkin, a little bit to Minions, A little bit to Mercs, but both those are starting to get big enough that it doesn't. I mean, they have way more options than that. Retribution has historically also kind of hovered in that area, but they're starting to get enough now that not so much. And obviously, new factions as they roll out are going to kind of be in that same boat. So, but for Circle, I would say this is pretty middle of the road. So I kind of see the power level of these sort of fluctuating around the same place. Tanith and Balder are a little bit of your like sort of kind of all-comers type lists. They can be built a lot of different ways. They can play a lot of different games. I don't think the two of them play the same game, mind you. Tanith is a little more offense, Balder's a little more defense. And then you have Mosar and Chromac, who I think sort of... Mosar is just really tricky. And honestly, like, building lists for that guy is one of the most exhausting mental exercises that I ever participate in. And then Chromac 2... Chromac 2 is sort of an awkward one in that ostensibly he has two things going for him that the rest of Circle doesn't always have. He has a feat that just is there to do damage, or to amplify damage. And if you look across all of Circle, and I'm mentally doing this as I think about it, nobody else plays a situation where that is the case. You know, Bradigus is threat range. Balder 2, both the Balders are defensive feats. Una is also a threat range feat. Mosar is a control feat. Kruger 2 is a control feat. Kruger 1 does do damage, but it's POW 10s. I would call that not an armor cracking feat. It's just you're removing more models you can do POW 10s with. Morvana 1, she has an offensive feat, so maybe that's the difference. Like Kruger 1 and Morvana 1 have offensive feats. Morvana 2 has an attrition feat. Kaya, all three Kayas have some manner of defensive feat, I would say. Chromac 1 is utility / defensive. Mostly it's just uninspiring. Wormwood has a defensive feat. Tanith has a utility feat. So Chromac 2 is the only warlock in Circle who has an armor cracking feat that is coupled with some survivability, right? +2 strength and armor for his battle group and a free cast of Carnage. However, what he entirely lacks, like entirely, is anything to increase threat range. So let's say you're bringing Warpwolves, something like Stalkers, Getteriks. Your threat range is 11 inches plus a Hunter's Mark. So maximum of 13 inches, and you got to actually hit a Hunter's Mark to pull that off. So like of these warlocks, and he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't do a whole lot for infantry. And then the other thing he brings to the table in this setup is he is personally very dangerous as well. He is in some ways very Butcher-esque in that manner. I mean, he's a caster that can drop a heavy on his own, on his feet, not on his feet, etc. But honestly, he doesn't bring a lot of threat range. He doesn't bring a lot of spells. I think you're leveraging him really in that situation where you want to deal with armor. So, and like where you're not being out threatened. And that's a really tough place to be right now. I think, even, like I played a game against Harkovich this weekend, and his heavies still are, because of mobility, they go from speed 6 to, they go up to speed 6, and they have 1-inch melee most of the time. So you're talking 10-inch threats. So you have to bring Warpwolves to be threatening at least that far. The Shadowhorn can threaten that far, but you're spending one for the leap. You are ending up an inch short if you're bringing Gnarlhorns or Riphorns, unless you can apply Hunter's Mark. And they don't have Pathfinder. So Chromic 2 probably does have some space to play here, but I think you've got to really be looking at what he's doing and trying to leverage it correctly, and it's going to be tough in a lot of cases. But he does have some benefits of things that people don't really expect. So I've run the math a bunch of times, and Riphorn Satyrs at 1221, Getorix at 1421, Stalkers at 1420, things like that actually are way more survivable than you would think, or way more survivable than you're used to. That simple +2 armor is a big deal. So anyways, that's Chromic 2. And Mosar, what he brings to the table is going to be a lot of really random things. So Curse of Shadows is a damage buff. One thing to throw out there, every one of these casters does have a way to increase damage. Tanith has Scything Touch, Baldur has Stone Skin, Chromac 2 has his feet, and Mosar has Curse of Shadows. So every one of these casters does have a way to increase output, offensive damage. Mosar brings a slew of just sort of all over the place, in my opinion, stuff. I think he's bringing stuff like I said, Curse of Shadows, but he's got Sands of Fate, which means he can sort of position in a bunch of places. He potentially can clean up a lot of infantry on his own. He also has Sunhammer, which will make him advantaged in some of those like many Warjack scenarios. His feet actually so into stuff like Herkovich, Karchev, Aimon, and those aren't necessarily great examples because those aren't on the UDR, but like into stuff like that, he's really going to help. If you can play a long game with him, he's going to slowly attrition that stuff down throughout the game. Just because he can, just because of how Curse works, how Curse of Shadows works, Mirage gives you some threat range. He sort of has a little bit of everything, but while being squishy, and it's not always easy to apply, and frankly, it's list building that I have the biggest trouble with. What I kind of want with him is a list where I can basically bring either like Bloodweavers or Wolves of Orboros, something like that, where I can Sands of Fate as much as I want to, while also being able to get enough heavy war beasts in the list. Like I really only need like 1 or 2 units of either of those, and that's not really enough to be getting enough free points so that doesn't feel worthwhile. But like I want to bring armor cracking. I think Devourer's Host might be okay, but now I'm sort of forced into having to crack armor with like Wolf Riders, Death Wolves, or Ravagers, which I think he can do. But I think, and he certainly can deal with infantry, but I think he wants to do a lot of that. He can kind of do a solid amount of that on his own. Secret Masters is sort of compelling because I think the battle engine is pretty solid with him. I think the benefit in that theme is solid with him, but then he doesn't really have a good Sands of Fate target. And so on and on. It kind of goes like this. So to me, it's been an exhausting. I haven't been able to build a list I like with him. So, but I think he's a good inclusion. So I think all of these are sort of in the range where, yes, in champions that we can be competitive. Where I think you're going to have to put some thought into how you're building your list. You're not just going to be able to go, oh, well, this was the list I was playing anyways, and it's super strong into everything, so I'm going to do it again. So you're going to have to give it some thought in that same manner. But then what? So, and then, we need to look at sort of some of the problems that are in this list. So I'm just going to sort of breeze through who all the casters are and sort of what we need to be thinking about when we're building lists now. So in Convergence, we have Eminent Configurator Orion, we have Axis, the Harmonic Enforcer, we have Forge Master Syntherian, and we have Iron Mother Directrix. Personally, of this list, I expect the most common pairing to be Orion Axis, and I sort of expect you could see Axis Syntherian, you could see Orion Syntherian. I don't think you're going to see too much Iron Mother. I could be wrong on that, but I think basically I don't really think Orion Mother is a good pairing generally, as the perception. So here there's really, in my opinion, a couple things that you need to be concerned with just because it's convergence. One, the infantry theme has massively high recursion, and that means RFP that is not specific to living and undead is going to be a premium. And with that in mind, the only really option that brings that specific benefit is going to be Mosar because of Krovas. I don't know if it's worth like skewing your list for that one subset of this faction, but it's something to keep in mind. The other thing you're going to see is the TEPs, the battle engines being played, because they're just phenomenal, and there's no reason that at least one, if not both of these casters is just going to be playing it. They're hard to kill at range because they have shield guards, even if they don't bring more shield guards through the theme that they're allowed, and they're going to. So like shooting it off the table is nigh impossible, so you're going to want to be dealing with it melee. It's not that heavily armored. As long as it's not Axis's feet turn, you have a pretty decent chance of killing it if you can get to it but it can shred infantry. It's just a very, very strong piece. So anything that you can do to try to kill it, I think, is going to be great. Unfortunately, we don't have any like blind effects in the faction, or that would be great. So that's the pairing to keep in mind. I think Mosar gives you a little bit of an edge. I think to an extent, if they're bringing their Warjacks, I think Balder's denial and defensive abilities can really probably help you out. Tanith can probably get enough offense. Chromac might be able to get enough offense. They don't really have the longest threat ranges except for the TEP. So yeah, Secret Masters potentially has some strength here just because of the sack pawn. In Crix, they've got Banewitch Agathea, Wraithwitch Denegra, that's Denegra 2, Lichlord Terminus, and Captain Iacos, who's obviously Iacos too. I think you're going to see Denegra. I think the strongest pairing in this is probably Agathea, Denegra 2. I think you could see any of them, but I think Denegra 2 with her changes is the most likely you're going to see. I think you, if you see somebody playing Ghostfleet here, that RFP that I talked about is going to be a big deal. But you can bring Bloodweavers to bridge some of that gap in this particular case, or Mosar, and you're going to have some strength there. Mosar with the ability to jump around the table is going to definitely be a strength against a Denegra 2, if you want to go that route. I think Agathea, Iacos you could see in the Warjack theme, so don't try to kill them with ranged attacks. I would say bring, they're going to still be playing mostly infantry or their Warjacks, and you don't want to try to shoot their Warjacks, you want to try to melee them. So keep that in mind as you're sort of assembling what you're doing. Also, Carapace, I believe, is only range, not range and magic, so that's totally still an option. Signar, we're looking at Major Mathematics, Colonel Marcus Siege Brisbane, that's Siege 2, Captain Jeremiah Cray, and Captain Allison Jakes. I would expect you're going to see Cray paired with one of the other two. Maddox will probably be in the Storm Division, Siege probably in Trenchers, Cray in Heavy Metal. You could see Jakes too, I think. I don't know which thing you'd see her then, probably Heavy Metal. This is going to be a situation where Cray is going to probably be the list that are crutching on the hardest, and his jacks are going to have pretty long threat ranges, and that's something you're definitely going to be keeping in mind with your list construction. So you're either going to want some infantry that can get in the way and sort of like generate generate scenarios where you're not losing the alpha super hard. So like Chromac 2 is probably going to have to do something like that. 13 inches with Hunter's Mark ties his threat range without using his feet. If he uses his feet, he's going to, I think it's 15 with things like Stormclads, which is what I would probably be leaning into playing. Or at least certainly considering. And even without that, it's still 14 with his feet. So I think you're going to have a pretty bad time with something like Chromac unless you can find a way to extend threat. I do think you can do things like, you know, Wolf Riders with Mirage are going to get there, especially if they have Hunter's Mark. Balder 1 can hopefully use his feet to sort of blunt that alpha on the before it approaches you. With Tanith, it really depends on the list. You know, I think you leverage your Loki there because he threatens 16 with Shifting Stone placement. So, you know, you want to get that asymmetrical, you want to start the asymmetrical trading to see how that plays out. With Maddox, watch out for if they have cavalry. If they have cavalry, you tend to want to be very careful into dropping your heavies into it. Or even things like Griffins don't really want to deal with that. So we're just going to keep moving forward. We've got Grimkin. They have Heretic, Zavanna Aga, the Fate Keeper. That's Old Witch 3, I guess. The Wanderer and the King of Nothing. I talked about this before. I think with Grimkin, you need to know what all their warlocks do, because next season, assuming there's no format change or anything like that, it's going to be, you're going to see similar things. I think the Heretic's going to stay on there all the time. I didn't talk about this beforehand. One of the trends that we've seen that doesn't seem to be changing is that the battle box casters seem to be designed to stay on the active duty roster in perpetuity. Again, if a format change happens, I may revise that, but this is the 5th, I believe this will be the 5th season of Mark III, and or 4th, either way, 4th or 5th, and this is we've had those battle box casters each time. So I think the Heretic will always be there. These others may rotate around. I think they're all strong. I think you need to know what they do. I think you need to know how your list can handle it. You should probably expect you need some magic weapons, because one of their lists probably will be in Dark Menagerie, if not both, and that list will probably contain Gremlin Swarms. That being the case, you need to at least have access to some magic weapons, because if you can't deal with them, they will run the table and you will lose just because of that alone. Otherwise, see what they do. Don't rely on guns don't rely on your guns having much range against Old Witch. Make sure you have a to-hit buff for the Wanderer. Any anti-magic for the King of Nothing is going to be good, but you're just going to have to read and be aware of his tricks and figure it out from there. Khador, Lord Kozlov, Viscount of Skarsgård. Again, Zavanna Aga, the Fate Keeper, so that's Old Witch 2. Vladimir Shepeshi, Great Prince of Umbre, so that's Vlad 3. And Commander Sorsha, which is Sorsha 1. I would imagine the vast majority of players in Khador are going to be playing it. I'm talking about champions for the moment. In Masters, like I said, I think you play your usual stuff. I think some of these small factions are going to probably play this. Mercs will play it. You'll see why when we get to it. The rest, I would count on the meta you've seen develop and continue to develop. I think in champions, however, that you're going to see Old Witch and Sorsha, most likely. And the thing with Sorsha is she's going to get threat on you. She's going to have guns on you. And you need to either be immune to cold, be able to block line of sight, or just be survivable enough without. The Animus from, it's worth her existence in this format alone. The Animus from the Wold Watcher or from the Gnarlhorn is worth considering just to keep your army alive, plus have some beasts that won't be affected by your feet. I think Druids with the attachment are worth it for the same reason. Your huge bases are going to be worth it for much the same reason. And there might be something else that's immune to cold that I'm not thinking of. If you have a list that Winter Argus is playing well in, possibly that. Yeah, so I think you're going to want to definitely consider for champions, especially if you know Khador is going to be there, any of those options, because Sorsha 1 is way better than most people have given credit for throughout Mark III, and I think in champions you're likely to see her. Legion has Carissa, Conviction of Everblight, Thagros, Prophet of Everblight, that's Thagros 1, Rias, Sigil of Everblight, which is Rias 1, and Fianna, Torment of Everblight, which is of course Fianna 2. I imagine you're going to see Fianna and somebody, probably Thagros. You need to be... Most of their stuff that's going to CID in January isn't going to really step into the game until probably April at the soonest, likely even May. So I wouldn't get too concerned with those changes, but I imagine Thagarash will increase as he's an Ogryn and it's focused on Ogryn. But I think you're going to see Fianna be prepared to bring things that can deal with high defense for her feet or be able to survive her feet. Do not count on Balder here because she's going to probably be playing Flying Beasts. Thagarash can stack armor pretty high, so make sure that you can deal with that. I think you'll see Thrones of Everblight with him. You might see Rias, Chrism maybe, but in general, Legion's a little lower on the power level right now, and this list doesn't really change that. For Mercs, we've got Lieutenant Cross, Resistance Fighter, that's Gaston 2. General Ostrom, Ashlyn Delise, and Magnus the Warlord, which is Magnus 2. This is bar none the best grouping of these in the entire list that we'll go through. Ostrom has been a terror in that faction for the entirety of Mark III. Magnus is now starting to step into his own, bringing a lot of warjacks to get with Unyielding and the Irregulars theme, which allows them to get advanced move. And then they're putting jacks at like the 23 or 25. It's way up the table inch mark and saying you need to deal with this. And it's going to be pretty hard. And then his feet will lock you down. So when the die roll against him. Ashlyn Delise just coming off of a bunch of changes. I think she's in one of the strongest places she's ever been. And I think you really want to know what the theme, Lily's resistance theme does for her and for Gaston, who I think also ended up in a very good place. So like all of these are relevant. For Ostrom, you're going to really want to know what to do against bunnies with long threat ranges. Do not count on stealth to save you because they'll either bring, they're either going to be bringing Gabba Reinhold or a battle engine, both of which can remove stealth from a single model. So don't count on your stalker surviving just from stealth. Don't count, if you've got someone like Tanith, make sure you've got more than just the stealth to save her, and so forth. Yeah, they're going to be tough. Prepare for them, and expect to see I would expect to see this in their Masters as well. I did mention that mostly I didn't expect that to be the case, but for this one it will be. Minions, we got Bloody Barnabas, Jaga Jaga the Death Charmer. That's Barnabas 1, by the way. Sturmendrang and Midas. With the changes that they saw, there's no world you don't see Jaga Jaga as one of the casters and probably be the strongest. She's gonna play a fair game in the way that Vlad 1 plays a fair game, which is to say it looks fair, but then the dice are completely in her favor. So just keep that in mind. I think she's going to be playing ranged attacks, so you won't want to skew that. Barnabas is going to really stop your ranged attacks, so keep that in mind. I think you're going to see these two if it's in Champions. I think if it's outside of Champions, they probably don't bother, and they go with... they might, just for the options, because you got more options with all the different utility pieces, but I think probably you go with like Jaga Jaga and Rask. Protectorate, we've got Malekith the Burning Truth, Anson Durst, Rock of the Faith, High Executioner Serveth Resnick, which is Resnick 1, and Thyra, Flame of Shadow. I would expect Thyra here with one of the other, probably Durst to back her up. Durst is going to bring an armor skew, Thyra is going to bring some threat range. Just make sure your list is sort of prepared to deal with both. You're going to want some accuracy, you're going to want to be able to do damage. Retribution has Magister Helena, Alara, Death Shadow, which is Alara 2, Adeptus Ron, and Raven the Eternal Light. I imagine you probably still won't see much Raven. I think you'll see Ron Alara more likely. You might see Alara Helena. Helena is usually their anti-shooting list. Alara has some ridiculously long threat ranges, and she can play infantry or jacks. I think she'll play mostly infantry. I think Ron... how good he is depends on how good your opponent actually is. So just be prepared for some very long threatening stuff with Alara, and she can hit pretty hard. She brings a lot more damage than it looks like pretty frequently. So be prepared to be able to kill infantry, blunt and alpha, stay safe, much as you can there. Scorn has Beastmaster Zakar, Primus Jalam, Lord Tyrant Zadesh, which is Zadesh 2, and Supreme Optimus Zal, which is Zal 1. I suspect you will see Zadesh Jalam. Jalam will be shooting. Zadesh could be built a bunch of ways. So look into them. I don't think there's any like specific thing in your list that I can recommend off the top of my head, like as an answer that you must have, but just be prepared to deal with them. Jalam has a pretty good defensive feat, much better than Zadesh's in my opinion. And so you're probably going to want to look at ways to hit very reliably without, like with one less die, or ways to get in his face to like blunt the counter attack he'll get when you can't do anything to him. And then finally, Trollbloods, we've got Ragnar, Sky Splitter, the Rune Master, Kolgrima, Stone Truth, Winter Witch, Borka, Vengeance of the Rimshaws, which is Borka 2, and Grim Angus, which is Angus 1, Grim 1. All 4 of these are fantastic. If you can be immune to cold damage, you might get an advantage in the middle 2. Watch out for Grim 1's Assassination, as well as his feet stopping charges, lowering your defense, and ultimately like making moving around the table very much a pain in the ass. Ragnar is just sort of, in general, like a really good anti-ranged, although I think Kolgrima and Borka in their ways are also anti-ranged. A very good ADR for them. Definitely look into some of the newer things and be prepared for them. Okay, so now that we've sort of like piled through that, and this episode is going to be one of the longer ones also because there's a lot of potential content here, and I may end up going with some additional supplementary stuff down the road with this, depending as I start to figure out what I'm testing for it. Right now, I'm very torn actually into who I think is going to be the best in this format. I think there's, I think Tanith is always going to be a strong option because she can be built in so many different ways. She can play almost in every one of our themes, although Called Wild is still really annoying to think about, but she can play in most of our themes. I actually think with a few of the options in here that Druids of Orboros might become a compelling option. So Secret Masters might be compelling. I think Mosar actually answers a bunch of the like problems that are hard to answer without your list answering it. So he's definitely one worth consideration for that reason. I think that you're going to want to be able to deal damage, and I think you're going to want to be able to blunt an alpha as much as you can. Baldur can kind of do that a lot of the time, depending on the type of alpha that it is. Tanith and Chromac bring some pretty high accuracy. Mosar can do that with a Wild Argus. And then from there, it just gets kind of tricky. I sort of feel like I almost wish that I had 3 of these to cover all of my bases, or one of each theme. But you're gonna kind of have to pick and choose and maybe see where you're weaker, where you're stronger, and then adjust on the fly. I think so. Not the strongest ADR we could have gotten. Certainly not the weakest we could have gotten. I think, like I said, very middle of the road. Very much you're going to have to build a list and find out how it plays and what answers it needs to solve, put some reps in, things like that. If in doubt, I think Tanith and Baldur are going to give you your most flexibility of these. I think Chromac, I'm sort of rehashing a little bit at the beginning, but Tanith and Baldur are going to give you the most flexibility. Mosar is going to be the most difficult. He may have more tools than the other two, but he's also much less survivable. You have to be much more careful with how you play him. And then I already mentioned Tanith. She's real flexible. She's flexible but more offensive focus. Baldur 1 is flexible, a little more defensive focus. And then Chromac, who is basically all offense, but I think you're going to have to really leverage Chromac doing a lot of personal work and dealing with mitigating the fact that you're going to not have, you're not going to have the threat range on people. So focus on those weaknesses of the list. So the weakness kind of with Tanith and Balder, like I said, one is more offensive, one is more defensive, and look at like how you need to cover those bases. You're gonna get the RFP with Mosar and some of the control factors and things like that, and yeah. Yeah, take a look at that. Think about your list building. As I kind of come up with what my pairing is going to be, and it'll probably be, I probably won't get anything locked in before ATC because I'm more focused on the list I'm playing there at this point. But those are pretty nearly locked in. I'm sort of working out the last kinks on a couple of them, but neither of them none of them are these warlocks. Theme-wise, I think all of our themes are valid for any of these casters. Well, not for any of them. Let's hit that up real quick. I've been talking about it through my theme situation, but Tanith and Balder, I think, can play in every theme, although I think Balder slightly advantaged in any of the ones that bring wolves, probably. I think Bones and Secret Masters could be pretty compelling with him. And the others are okay. Devourer's Host is probably the best of the ones I didn't mention. Tanith can play in all of them. Call of the Wild has some frustrations with a few things, but I think she can play with all of them. Mosar probably kind of can play with all of them, but again, his list building is so difficult. I've not quite been able to figure out what I want with him to make it work. It would be really great actually if Privateer could take I would love to see them take a look at Mosar just because not because I think his power level's that far off, but I feel like your ability to build a list for him is so difficult with the tools we have that it would be great if, you know, maybe Sands of Fate didn't have to say friendly faction. If it just said friendly, now we can bring minion options to jump to. Or if he had easier ways to apply his spells other ways, or if it didn't just say living, or you know what I mean, like there's a bunch of ways with that spell that things could be a little different. They may not change it since it's on King of Nothing. They obviously have an intent with it, but there's a few other things that could be done. But yeah, I think he's playable. I think you could look at him. I like Devourer's Host probably off the top of my head the most. I know I've seen Bones pop up with him. Wild Hunt. Secret Masters, it feels awkward to build for him. And I probably just wouldn't do Call of the Wild. And then Chromac 2, honestly, Chromac 2 I would only play in, I personally would only play in Devourer's Host or in Call of the Wild. Not necessarily in that order. So that's kind of the breakdown of ADR. Take a look, see what it is you think will work for you. Start building. Let me know what you're building. I'd love to have plenty of conversations about champions and how people think it's going to work. And this episode probably went about 15 minutes longer than I was aiming for. So that's okay. We will be back probably on Wednesday on our normal schedule to do the last theme for us. And, you know, I may jump in with a topic or two in the meantime. So thanks for watching, and we will catch you later.